The second Trump-Kim summit ends abruptly with no deal reached as neither side could find common ground over sanctions and the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. We go live to Hanoi in moments. Also coming up, Facebook is accused of censoring conservative voices as a whistleblower reveals how the social network suppresses content and limits exposure.
In the course of doing my duties, I noticed other things that were going on accounts. I would see it appear on several different conservative pages.
And French sporting goods retailer Decathlon is forced to drop plans to sell a sports version of the hijab in France after staff receive violent threats. We get reaction in Paris.
So if she wants to wear it, you know, it's her choice.
It shocked me that they had to cancel the sales.
It's not an act of secularism, it's rather an act. I will not go so far as to say Islamophobic, but it's very anti-Islamic.
Around the clock, across the world, this is your RT International. From the team and myself, Ewan O'Neill, hello and welcome. Our top story. There were high hopes in Hanoi, but both Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un have come away empty-handed from their much-anticipated second summit. The talks ended earlier than expected, with the US president blaming North Korea's demands over lifting sanctions for the failure to cut a deal. It came as a surprise to many after the optimism shown by both leaders before the talks.
The first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first.
Boy, if you could have heard that dialogue, what you would pay for that dialogue, it was good.
Always have to be prepared to walk. I could have signed an agreement today, and then you people would have said, oh, what a terrible deal, what a terrible thing he did. No, you'll have to be prepared to walk.
Well, our correspondent in Hanoi, Evangelo Sipsa, sums up what became a fleeting second day of the summit.
Talks were cut short because no agreement was made. The two were actually supposed to have lunch and have a signing ceremony, which never happened. Now, the reason behind that was because Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, actually wanted the sanctions, the United Nations sanctions on Pyongyang entirely lifted.
And it was about the sanctions.
Will there be a third summit, Mr. President?
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that.
Donald Trump said that he could not give up entirely the sanctions. He cannot give us just whatever the DPRK leader wanted. So what he said is that it wasn't a good time to actually sign a deal, and sometimes that's what great leaders do. They just walk away for something to happen later on to potentially get a better deal. And what's interesting also here to point out is that he also mentioned that it's been a productive time between the two, but again, as he also kept on repeatedly saying that no deal was made because of the UN sanctions that he didn't agree with. Now, they didn't decide on what's going to happen on the Korean Peninsula, whether they're going to dismantle all the nuclear facilities, but what he did promise was no missiles will be flying over the Korean Peninsula in the time being. Now, if there's going to be a third summit, they did not clearly say if it's going to happen, but there was kind of open when it was mentioned. Another interesting factor to point out is that the two leaders of the regional leaders of Korea and Japan would be very, very interesting on their reactions on what they have to say of the outcome of this deal, because if anyone has to lose, it's pretty much them too.
Well, let's stay in Hanoi and speak to RT America's Scotty Nell Hughes on the program. Scotty, we spoke, 24 hours ago or so? There was optimism of a deal, but that has vanished, hasn't it? Trump blames demands over sanctions, but are there possibly other reasons here?
Well, absolutely, because these are demands that are not the first time being presented to the United States. This is exactly what I think anybody would have thought that Kim Jong-un would ask the United States after over 50 years of sanctions being put on North Korea and it crippling the infrastructure of North Korea right now. So this is not unexplainable, or to think that this is what North Korea would want. I think what we have to look at, what happened in the 24-hour period following the dinner last night and the talks today. You know, yes, President Trump does say that you need to walk away, and yes, he did want a full denuclearization of the North Korean peninsula, but just prior to going in, he put out a very optimistic tweet that I don't think is getting enough focus. He talked about that he needed the help of China, South Korea, Japan, and Russia in order to make North Korea successful financially. And I think you can also say that would be for security purposes as well. I think President Trump realized in order to accomplish a true, honest North Korea denuclearization, he was going to have the help of those that surrounded the country.
How much did he need a win here, Scotty? Because he hasn't got progress with North Korea. There's his self-triggered state of emergency back home. How much scrutiny is the embattled U.S. president likely to get when he gets back on American soil?
Well, I think the scrutiny started even before he stepped on the stage, as the media was moved up from a 5-hour press holding area to literally a 2 hours, which signaled something had happened that had cut this short, and it was not planned. Obviously, scrutiny for President Trump right now is at the highest peak probably yet of his administration, with Michael Cohen giving a very intriguing testimony in front of Congress in the last 24 hours. But the president definitely needed this win on the backs of the government shutdown that did not necessarily work for him for getting his full funding, as well as the controversy over the declaration of an emergency. So the president needed a win. He could have had one, which is what a lot of people are questioning, why he did not fight harder to have the actual end of the Korean War happen as well. That would have been just a very simple thing he could have touted, but for some reason did not even approach that, even in his comments following in his press conference.
Is there a glimmer of light here, though? At the news conference, we did hear Mr. Trump stress the warmth in relations with Kim, despite the lack of any agreement. Could a potential third summit make any headway from what you've seen there?
Well, I think this is why a couple people are scratching their heads, because if it was where both parties walked away from the table, or President Trump walked away from the table, you would not expect him to be saying such praises about Kim Jong-un. You would have actually, like any adversary, would have expected a little bit more confrontation. What I think the positive in all of this is, now that President Trump has recognized the power of those that surround North Korea, that the next time they meet, I bet that it's not going to be just between North Korea and the United States. I think it's going to be a bigger picture, something that is probably needed to happen from the very beginning, and President Trump is realizing this.
Interesting stuff. Host of News Views Hughes, RT America's Scotty Nell Hughes, live from Hanoi. Thank you very much.